joining us. There we go. Thank you for joining us for part 2, and thank you for your helpful comments in the evaluation from part 1. Joe and I both looked at those, and those are very helpful as we put these things together and think about in the future what might be helpful in the field. So thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And as Steve and Saskia said, welcome back, and thank you for returning today. And for those of you who couldn't make the first seminar, welcome. And we will do just a quick recap on that, what we talked about. But before we do that, let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. So the first thing we're going to cover is why social emotional learning. Why are we doing this? And then we're going to get into the science. Esteban?
Effective neuroscience. It's a field that's only been around for the last 10 years. And it talks about how emotions affect learning. So we talked last time about the ACEs study. We talked about trauma. Now we're going to talk about how emotions affect, what the neuroscience is behind how emotions affect learning in the classroom setting and learning in general. So hang on. We got some great information for you.
Great information. And then we're also going to talk about implementing social emotional learning at your school, and we're going to share our experiences. We don't have a cookie cutter, way of doing things, but we are learning as we go along. So we would like to know too what is working for you at that same, time as well. So.
And then we're going to talk about some tools available to you. We've got quite a vast array. So we don't want to overload you, but we want to give you as many free tools as there are out there for creating that trauma-informed social emotional learning environment in your classrooms and at your sites. And like Joe said, every site's different. So you'll be able to adapt these tools and use them to your best.
And along with that, the supports that are out there and available. So Stephen has got some great ones to share with us today. And just a quick recap on what we did last week on Thursday, May 4th. So the first thing we talked about what is social emotional learning and the evolution of SEL and CASEL. And then we talked about the effects of trauma on learning. That's where Steve shared with us the ACEs study, CDC and Kaiser. Effects of stress on the body, post-traumatic stress, trauma defined, what it actually is. And then of course we ended with the survey, and the question was, how does this information affect you? So I guess the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through and find out what the results of the survey are. Can we see a thumbs up on everybody who did the survey?
David did not receive the slide deck from session 1. Can that be resent? Yes, David, I think Sachiko can send that out. It looks like Kate Lulinski was able to do the survey. And I'm going to just open up the chat and see what we've got, what else we've got.
I saw a few thumbs ups from the Zoom reactions.
Perfect, perfect.
Unfortunately, as the presenter or having the screen up, I can't quite see everything that's going on. And then we have a poll for those of you who did take the survey, and for those of you who didn't, it's probably something that could be that you might find very helpful. So Sachiko, do you want to pop up the polls? Great. Okay, so these were the questions. Do you think your SEL self-evaluation result accurately reflects your mindset? I can tell you, I know from my own experience, we were surprised. So if you'll go ahead and answer your question in there.
That's for those of you that were able to get in there and take that self-evaluation. And if you weren't, as Joe said, we'll make sure that it gets out there again and gets sent so that you have the opportunity to take advantage of it. It's got some great information for looking at your teaching and how you set up your classroom for social emotional learning.
Okay, And are we there? Is our poll? Nope, people are still answering. I can see it.
People
moving.
still answering, yeah. This is where we should have that wonderful background music.
Right, the Jeopardy music. Okay,
You
we're
might
ready
need
to
to
go with the
scroll.
next question. Okay, and Sachika, oh, we've got 29% participation. We might have some people there that didn't get a chance to do the poll, so. Okay. Are we ready to go on to the next question?
Yeah, let's go ahead and go on to the next question, Joe.
Okay, so, and again, the questions are up there on the screen. How surprised were you with the results?
Yeah, all three questions are in one poll, and if you
Perfect.
scroll down, you will see all three questions and click
Okay.
submit.
Thank you. I'm not sure what I'm, a little different view from what I'm looking at. Great, thank you. Oh, yeah.
It looks like 10 people have participated. Does anyone still need some time, or should we share the results?
10 brave people.
Got 11 now. Numbers are going up.
Don't be shy.
And if you didn't, we understand as well. You weren't able to do the survey. Why don't we go ahead and, for the sake of time, why don't we go ahead and bring up the answers, Sachiko?
Sharing the results. I can also.
I didn't submit it.
So on the first one, do you think your SEL self-evaluation results accurately reflected your mindset? And it looks like 36% of the people that responded gave it a 4. No, I'm not. I don't see the answer actually.
It was, I believe it was on like a Likert scale, 1 being the least and 5 being the most. So we have for number 5 and number 4 actually are tied at 36%.
Perfect.
So that it accurately did reflect, and 2 and 3, not so much. Right there in the middle, about 18% said, maybe not. And then 2, 9% said not so much at all. So yeah, that's, I know that when I took it, and I took it with a group of counselors, we were all surprised too, so, especially counselors. Okay, question number 2, how surprised do you feel about the results of your survey? So if we're looking at that, and again, on a scale of 1 to 5, we see that 27% of you gave a 1 on that, very surprised. Sachiko, is that correct on it? Because I can't see. Is that how you did it on this one?
I believe it's the same.
Okay, great. And then 5 being not at all, and so 0. Okay, that's great. And then somewhere in the middle, we had 36% that said not so much. Okay. You know, again, taking some of the ones that we took and taken on growth mindset, we were all surprised at, you know, where we came out on that. So great. So thank you for taking the poll and taking the time to do the survey. Understood if you didn't have time that day, we did kind of let you know that it was going to take a moment to do. And I know if you want to do the surveys, you want to take the time with them to really answer them correctly. So yeah, and then some of you may not have been able to make it to the first one. So, okay, shall we go ahead and continue on? Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I was just looking at the chat real quick, Joe, and a question. Adrienne was a bit confused. She said there was a long homework assignment that I started but didn't have time to finish. Is that the survey? Yes, that was the survey, Adrienne. It was a bit lengthy. but it really tries to get into the weeds of, how you're doing as a teacher and maybe how your peers are doing in setting up an SEL informed environment. So some people, there were quite a few that didn't get to finish it. So that's why we get some of the, we don't get as many answers. So, and then we've got very deep and honest evaluation, more self-awareness about word selection. There's some good information in the chat here. So thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And like I said, we knew it was a homework assignment. So thank you for those who had the chance to do it. That's great. Okay, so we will go on. So the question is, why social emotional learning? Why are we doing this? Okay, well, as we've been talking about, the benefits of this are well researched. We do see that it leads to improved academic outcomes. I don't know if anybody remembers from last week, we did the history and we showed the timeline of when CASEL began in 1994, and then in 2009 it became legislative act where funding was provided. A year and a half later, 2011, we already saw an 11% increase. So we know that it works, and we're seeing that it works. And then the other part, or the next one, is it helps improve lifetime outcomes. Again, I'm going to refer back to last week in the ACEs study that Steve talked about, which was fascinating. And I know we'll probably talk a little bit more, review back on the ACEs study. But again, healthier people have healthier lives, emotionally healthier people. And then, of course, again, provides long-term and global benefits. And when we're talking about global benefits, not just with ourselves, but in a classroom, in a school, but just out there in the world, if people are a little bit more relaxed about themselves, feel better, that's going to be passed on. So, Stephen, would you like to add to that?
I'm going to add that in your classrooms are small, little microcosms of the world for these folks that come to our classrooms. I know both in our inmate education and outside of our inmate education, every little drop of that social emotional learning that you can provide in your classroom setting, and we'll get more into the details because that's kind of vague sounding, has reverberations out into the general population. So family members, extended family members. I remember working with a group at CDCR on social emotional learning. CDCR is Department of Corrections, so that's our state prisons. And one of the students, after we were done doing some training and then working with the students, basically said that he was using this in his visits with his family and his children. And that was already beginning to make a connection between him and his children. So these have great outcomes, even if it's on a small microcosm in our own little classrooms.
Absolutely. Hey, Stephen, would you like to tell us how emotions influence cognitive skills? Absolutely, absolutely. So as we talked about last week, we talked about how the human being in our development, our brain's development over millenniums of time, we started with what we call down here the limbic system, or the lizard brain. That was the first part of our brains as humans, as a species, that developed, and it's attached to our spinal cord. So that's where all of that connections down through the body. And then the mammalian brain is developed. That's the middle part of the brain. And then finally, the last part of the brain to develop in human beings in the last 200,000 years was the prefrontal cortex, what we call the neocortex. That's where these cognitive skills that connect us to learning are driven. They're driven, the whole brain is used, but they're driven by the neocortex, the prefrontal cortex. So when you see somebody that's lacking attention, the ability to stay focused, we call, a lot of times we speak to that as ADHD. 90% of the time, that's an underdeveloped executive function, which is that next word that's right there. The ability to stay focused, the ability to plan. Emotions affect the memory, how we store learning, and how we pull that information back out. It affects decision making. It affects critical thinking. And critical thinking, it can be categorized in so many ways. Test taking, for instance, requires that critical thinking. Collaboration,
Communication requires that critical thinking. And that problem solving and self-regulation, these are all tied to the development of that prefrontal cortex. And when there's trauma, or when there's an environment where somebody feels fear or they're incapable of connecting the dots, it's probably because they're in that lower brain and they're not able to connect to that prefrontal cortex, the neocortex. So we're going to talk more about that, but emotions influence every one of these cognitive skills and how someone feels about the environment they're a part of, literally how they feel. If they walk into a classroom environment and nothing to do with you, the teacher, but if there's trauma from previous experiences in the classroom setting, they're already on high alert and they're already shutting down that connection to the prefrontal cortex.
And again, remember last week we talked about, do you remember a time when you were traumatized by a teacher? You know, as an adult, you may recognize that that trauma was really not that big of a deal, but you still feel it. You still know what that felt like. So, okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next. So, helps improve lifetime outcomes. Again, I'm going to refer back to that CDC. It was such an excellent example of research that just shows, you know, it was a pyramid, if anybody remembers, almost like the Maslow's, but it really does affect every part of the well-being. So workforce readiness, okay, healthier living, people who had traumatic events in their lives didn't have as long a lives, relationships maybe not so healthy, and just overall mental wellness. And you can kind of see in the dimensions here of wellness, that includes everything. So we're talking about global, within a person, but again, global within a society. Anything that you'd like to add in here, Stephen, before we move on?
No, we can move on.
Okay, great. Okay, so again, I'm going to go back into history. And for those of you who studied education, you might remember the name John Dewey. And he said that education is obligated to train for citizenship. So the idea here being is that we have a platform, and school would be that platform. We have the students in front of us. It's that opportunity to provide them the nurturing and the information so that they can succeed emotionally in life. And this even goes back, like we're talking about that timeline, even Plato had information, talked about this stuff. So it's not anything new, but it's evolving, it's getting better known. And then of course, as we talked about last week, it's also, legislation has gotten involved. They're beginning to fund it. So, yep.
I just want to throw in there, for those of you that are fans of John Dewey, bravo. If you don't know of John Dewey came from the school of pragmatists. And that word sounds very pragmatic, but basis behind the pragmatists was that if you're going to make societal change, then you have to start foundationally at the where we educate our citizenship, schools. So that's K-12 all the way through adult school. And I love the statement in here, school and citizenship education are the best means of seeing the progress of the human race. It's not just the Americans, or it's the human race. So school and citizenship education. So I just wanted to bring that back up. And so creating those environments that are inviting and open environments. And it's more than that. When we finished last week, there was a comment in the comments. One of our astute peers that was on this webinar said that, so basically what you're talking about is creating a warm environment, warm, inviting classroom environment. And yes, that is one of the key ingredients. But if we're not also developing the skills that are necessary in a way that our students can digest the information, retrieve the information, and use the information, then just creating a warm, safe environment doesn't take them far enough. So this is what John Dewey, a pragmatist, is talking about. We've got to create the environment, and then we've got to give them the skill sets. And we're going to be talking about that a little further on, about creating those skill sets in the classroom setting.
And if you are familiar with the castle wheel, the very first layer from the center is classroom, and then school, and then it goes out to family relationships and community and so forth. But the goal here, as he says, world citizenship and lasting peace. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't that be lofty? But it would be wonderful. Okay, and then talking historically again, you may all remember locus of control. We have internal locus of control and then external. This was back in 1954. American psychologist Julian Rotter developed this. And with the internal locus of control, that's where everything is internalized and you take responsibility. It's I have control over my own behavior, over my own health, over my own self-efficacy. It's up to me whether I'm a positive thinker or not, okay? And it's just basically personal agency. Whereas the opposite would be the external locus of control, where the belief is it's the outside world that's, coming after me. And it's luck, it's fate, I have no power, no control over anything that I do in my life. I'm going to jump back to locus of control for internal. If you're familiar with the castle wheel, this reminds you of any of the components.
Well,
Chats in there?
people are commenting about that. I want to also bring up, so this is I love this visual that Joe found and put in here, because it really talks about where someone stands in dealing with trauma in their own learning. You've seen it in your classrooms. You'll see that student who this assignment is way too hard, I cannot do it, as opposed to this assignment is challenging, I need to keep trying. Well, if you're traumatized, you don't see a challenge, you see too hard. So this is a great picture of what happens when that executive function is developed in the brain, and then they can see, I can do this with a little bit of support, I can figure this out, as opposed to, I can't do this, it's too much, this won't make a difference, why should I try? We've all seen that in our students.
Okay, and I'm not sure I saw any comments about which component of CASTLE it might be. How about growth mindset? So if any of you are familiar with that, the idea is to reverse the negative thinking into positive. Like if you see up here, studying will help me do well in my test, versus the external saying studying is not going to make a difference. I'm not going to do well in the test. Or even down at the bottom, effort beats out luck anytime, or the external is, I just have terrible luck, I know I'm going to fail this, so I'm not even going to try. So again, this is exactly growth mindset as I was talking about. It's the evolution of a lot of these thoughts that are, bringing up into what we now know as social emotional learning and the castle wheel. So,
Adrian put in that people also say that about voting, your vote won't change the outcome. Very true, Adrian. Citizenship right there, just what our pragmatist was talking about. Feeling like you have the locus of control, your vote will make a difference. Well said. There's a civics lesson right there.
Mm-hmm. And you're right, external locus of control. Exactly. Okay, we'll go ahead and we'll move on to the big stuff now.
Effective neuroscience. So effective neuroscience is a branch of neuroscience, has been around basically for 10 years. And there's been some great work going on in understanding how emotions affect learning. We're going to look at two authors, two researchers. One is going to talk straight to teachers. She's a teacher. She's from the Effective Neuroscience School of Education at USC. She's fantastic. And we're going to look at another author who's done research on how emotions are made. We all assume we know where emotions come from, but this book tears it all apart and says emotions actually are built up from life experiences, epigenetic experiences, so many things, and they can be changed. Those emotions can be changed. We're not held to our emotions. Some people say, well, he's not emotional, she's stoic, she's very emotional, they're not emotional. You can say all of those things, but the neuroscience behind it is starting to understand how these emotions are built. So let's go on to the next slide.
Real quick, remind me vocabulary, epigenetic.
Epigenetic. So epigenetic trauma, epigenetic genesis is what's been passed on for generations through a family line. And it can be a social cultural milieu. Epigenetics can exist in a social cultural milieu. So a community, a tribe, it's passed on through the genetics of the community. So if there's traumatic experience, if there's For instance, the idea that you've probably heard from some of your students. My parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents didn't go to school. I'm the first one to go to school. When you hear that, that's a huge shift in that epigenetic understanding of myself as a student. Most of us don't realize that if we've been educated and our children have been educated, then their children will probably have a 90% chance of going on to higher learning, because it's built into the very epigenetic environment that they're a part of. You will go to school. This is what you do. This is how you do homework. You don't have to stress about taking a test. A lot of the students we see coming across our thresholds in our classrooms, they don't have that behind them. So for them, the very experience of coming to school is a whole new experience.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of emotional sense of themselves that goes into the history of this. Adrian put also how the history of slavery has affected, absolutely. Whether it's slavery or our Native American folks, just our Native folks around the world, and how they've been traumatized by colonization. I mean, we can go on for days on all of this. The question is, how do we help them build the skill sets back up to see themselves beyond that trauma that has affected them?
Yes, thank you. Okay.
So what is effective neuroscience? It examines how the brain creates emotional responses. Literally, that's what it is. How the brain creates emotional responses. And not only just emotional responses, but the brain then creates chemical reactions in the body. So if you have a successful experience, you get serotonin levels rise in your brain, endorphins rise, and your whole body feels good. Trauma does just the opposite. It puts epinephrines into the body and then creates a constriction in the body. This is why you see somebody who's struggling with trauma, they constrict. So it's a fascinating study of chemistry, biochemistry, but really how the brain creates these emotional responses. Affects, emotions, which are psychological and involve changes to the body, the autonomic nervous system activity, feeling states, and urges to act in specific ways. When you see somebody that is they can't stay focused, they're very spontaneous, probably that learning in your classroom is affecting them in such a way that it's causing them to react. And it's not you personally, it's something they're struggling with. We've all seen it where we've all been through college or school, whatever level of school, and you had that big test coming up or that paper you had to write, and everything just wants to shut down. Your palms get sweaty. That's chemistry from the brain. Those are emotions that are built by the brain. It aims to understand brain structures and chemicals. That is effective neuroscience. So it's important that we know this information when we think about our students. If we're going to create a social, emotional learning environment in our classrooms, we need to understand this information. We don't need to be specialists in it, but every bit we can get, every bit of knowledge we can get, just helps us get a better picture of who we're working with.
Yeah, and not react other than positively towards it. Okay, emotions that affect learning. So traditional thinking, the brain regulates the body function. The brain is telling everything what to do, but we now know that that is not really the case. So modern thinking says the two work together. So I just kind of going back, we've been talking about how we know that emotion is important in education, that it's, as Steve said, about attention. And then last week, I had the chart where it talked about the memory. We had good stress, bad stress. Good stress kind of helps you ramp up and remember things like for testing, whereas bad stress, that's ongoing stress that is not necessarily related to the studying. The memory is just not there. The focus is just not there. And while, we as educators have certainly intuited over time memoriam that emotions affect learning, it's now backed up by science. And this is what Steve is talking about here. A lot of science in there that I can read and understand as I'm reading it, but boy, I sure couldn't tell it to you. It's very complicated. And again, this goes back into, furthermore, the discussion on the body keeps the score and the effects of post-traumatic stress. And because we may never know what a student's triggers are, it's just important that we create a school that is trauma informed so that we are aware of this. And basically, trauma informed is pretty much everything covered within social emotional learning and wellness, because conversely, an emotionally stressful environment is going to be counterproductive for actually all of us. And again, talking last week, referring back, we talked about how social emotional learning for adults who are teaching it actually has the effect where it's helping them as well. So it's kind of like talking it through makes you realize that life is pretty positive, and you just start thinking in terms of that.
Nicely said, Joe. Nicely said. When a classroom is a safe learning environment where learning is taking place because the skill sets have been put into place, there's a reciprocal relationship between the instructor and the student. Everybody gets endorphin drops and serotonin levels go up in the brain. It's a win-win.
Yeah. I think we've all experienced that.
So here we go, your first book. If you have not had the opportunity to hear Mary Helen Imordino Yang speak, there's some YouTube videos available. This book, she's really focused, it leans more towards K-12, but it's very applicable to adult ed. One day, maybe, I hope to put an adult ed emotions learning in the brain type of book out there. But anyways, her expertise, she was an educator. She was a K-8 educator, went into administration, went back to school, and then became a psychologist and specialized in affective neuroscience. She's the director of the USC Center for Affective Neuroscience, Development, Learning, and Education. She's professor of education, professor of psychology and neuroscience. You can see it all there. But what her book does is it really breaks down the neuroscience behind affective neuroscience, and she gives you applicable skill sets to apply in the classroom setting. I'm using the book right now as a book study for CDCR teachers. They're loving it. Of course, we have to adapt it because they're dealing with adults in incarceration, but the information is very valuable in the book. So here's book number 1 that we wanted to share with you and just give you some insights. Again, she has some YouTube videos up there if you want to watch some of her lectures.
More homework. We're just giving them more homework. Actually, it's not homework. This is if you're interested in it. And for those of you who are connected with the California Council of Adult Education, CCAE, not last, I guess just maybe a month ago, but last year it was in Los Angeles, and we hosted it, and she was our keynote speaker. So if you happen to be here, and you would have heard her speak. So yeah, very interesting, but it does, it's a little more complicated than the body keeps the score, because I think it goes into a little bit more science. Okay, and more homework? You're gonna give them more homework?
So the reason this book was so important is, as Joe pointed out 2 slides back, how emotions are made is the science behind it is really just coming to fruition. We're starting to understand that it isn't just the brain that creates emotions, it's the whole body, and they work collaboratively, the body and the brain. And I think most of us intuited this, but the science is now there. And this book by Lisa Feldman Barrett, she really digs into the affective neuroscience and the psychology of emotion. And there's some really, well, let me just put it this way. I was quite surprised when I made some of the discoveries that she's discovered through her study of affective neuroscience and how emotions are built in the body and how we can change emotions when it comes to dealing with trauma, when it comes to dealing with folks that might see school and learning as traumatizing for them. So she talks about ways that we can deal with that form of trauma and then help people create new emotions around their learning processes. So homework if you want it. And what I would say is we're giving you these wonderful tools. I would say pick one of them and do a book study. If you have PLCs at your school, or if you just have a group of teachers that are really interested in this information, do a book study and break it apart Nobody has all the information, but every bit we can get is helpful.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, because these books can be complicated. I know, like I'm projecting here. I thought that the body keeps the score was written very eloquently and easy to follow. But the other one that we just looked at was a little more complicated because it got a little more into the science. So, but that's a great idea. Great idea. Okay, and we're ready to move along. Okay, how does this information affect you personally, and how does it affect your work with students? So in that, that was part of our survey. That was one of the things. And then also too, just taking this, where are we going with this? What are you going to do? How are you going to implement that? And I think that's what we're going to start talking about now is implementation. And we really would like to get some of your information if you've done some things at your school site or in your classroom, because as Steve just said, nobody's going to know it all, but we're all trying to figure this out, and we know good ideas when we see them, right? So did you have anything here that you wanted to put in, Steve?
Yeah, I do. So what I'd like to add to this is, as you're going through this wonderful information, just remember that we all carry some levels of trauma. Life, that is the nature of life. As the Buddha said, that is the nature of life. So when you're going through this, also do self-care. When you're going through this information, if you're triggered, this was brought up last week, somebody shared, if you're triggered by any of this information, that's something for you to really take in and think about. And maybe there might be some areas for work for yourself as a human being. We're all human beings here. And what we bring to the classroom is what we bring from our lives. We bring it into the classroom. We don't realize it. Great study that was done about how what I carry with me affects the relationship I have with the first person I meet in the beginning of the day. And it was a really great study. It was a YouTube video. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the study, but it just showed how I show up and what I'm carrying with me, what baggage I'm carrying with me, then turns around and reflects back to me what that other person feels from me. It reflects back. So this is part of our classroom setting. So if any of this triggers you, all I want to say is take care and seek the support you may need to work through some of this stuff. It's wonderful work, but it can also be deep work for ourselves as teachers as well.
Yeah, definitely emotionally exhausting, for sure. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that too. Okay, so here we are. We're going to share some experiences. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to talk about what we at Los Angeles Unified District Division of Adult and Career Education are working on. So I came into my position just about a year ago, and it was all new. Our director at the time said, social emotional learning, let's figure out how to get it implemented. So we did, we tried, and I will talk about what we did. So here was our timeline. So a year ago, just about, right after school ended, we had a session for our assistant principals of the Adult Counseling Service. We call them APAC, so I'm going to put that in there. And we are fortunate enough to have a CalPro trainer on staff here who's excellent. So he knew just the training. It's a big CalPro training, but we pared it down so that we could just take it one bite at a time and focus on growth mindset. And as it turned out, our district also selected that element. So it was perfect. We were all in line with that. So the whole idea was, the goal was to implement it into the enrollment process and the counseling. We also were thinking of the classrooms, but we need, because we're the first touch when the student comes in. So we were trying to figure out a way of doing this, and we ended up was the idea that a counselor or an advisor, we have an orientation program, which I'll talk more about in a moment, we're given a script. We came up with a script that they would just go in and meet the people in the orientation class, talk about it. And then we also came up for resources, a little toolbox online for them to start putting things in. And then we were also, that was going to be really built to follow up with our academic PLCs. And then following that, our new, well, relatively new now, superintendent had set up some training days for teachers. So this was nice. August 9th, right before, and through 11th, right before school started. And here again, we were able to enlist the help of CalPro, and we did a PLC training, and we focused again on the feedback and for growth mindset. And the goal was to help drive PLCs. Okay, how did it all go? Well, not as quickly as we were hoping. So there is a picture, a beautiful picture of asparagus there. Does anybody have any idea why I might have put that in there? I borrowed that from somebody when I was giving a presentation, so I will give them credit for it. And I thought it was great. Does anybody have an idea of what the asparagus might represent? Probably not. Does anybody here, anybody a gardener, farmer, know how long it takes to grow asparagus? No answers? Okay, well, I guess I'll tell you. It takes 3 years. So the idea is you plant a seed.
Timothy Amaral put forever.
Yeah, forever. Perfect. Thank you. You got it. That's exactly right. It seems like forever, but it actually takes 3 years. But you're right. This might be forever for us. So our goals was to push it through and get it moving and this and that. We were all excited. But the truth is that the folks down in the school sites that are busy, and as you all know, when enrollment comes, everything you're trying to implement drops just to get the students through and get them enrolled and get school started. So it's kind of what happened. The ball kind of dropped. We didn't get it moving quite as well as we'd hoped to. But I will say I have one school that I'm well aware of actually is doing this. And the other thing I'm going to say about that is they are the one school with the highest level of persistence. Connection, don't know, but I like to think that there is. So we're going to work on that, and so that we will hopefully get some, good data to show us that it is helping. Because if we see that, we know it's going to help. It's just sort of, as we say before, it's intuitive, but the data is going to show us that yes, it does. So, it's motivation to keep going. So that was this year. Next year, our plan is to go a little bit more. So starting in this month, at the end of this month when school is out, we are going to be having some training. We have an orientation class, and it's called Student Tools for Educational Pathways. And I'm sorry, I said success in there. That's me. That was wrong. It should be pathways. It's steps. And in the orientation class, we do, of course, everything that we need to do in terms of getting the student enrolled, the orientation about the school, but also all the paperwork and the assessment. Then we also have a component there that familiarizes them with the technology that we're using. Zoom and the learning platform, management platform we're using is Schoology, so that they know how to maneuver around, because a lot of our work, especially with the academic department, they can do it online, which is wonderful. That is the one fortunate thing that COVID brought us, is that we were all pushed to do online, which we wanted to, which is great for the students, so they can do work whenever it suits them. And then in that, we are including a more developed focus on the growth mindset. So in that, we're going to work on SMART goals, growth mindset, time management, and we're going to see how this goes. Because going back to the asparagus, part of the asparagus, growing the asparagus, is you have to change the culture of the people that are doing this. Not that they don't all believe it, because we know that they see it as good information. It's just getting it implemented, starting a new habit. And that just gets a little bit tricky. But I think we'll be good at it. We'll do the training. And then the next step on that is going to be in the classroom, a little more focused in that. And again, I'm talking about the academic class or office and academic classroom right now. So one of the things that I've kind of realized is that we need to kind of step back here on our PLCs, because our schools are running them very differently. And what I've observed in many cases, the teachers who are supposed to be running the PLC don't know what that is, don't know what that means. And they wait for the advisors or their people to walk in and show them. So we're going to do a little bit of a step back We'll continue the focus on growth mindset, but we're also going to let them see what we are doing in the orientation class so that they can follow through with it, so that they know. And I know every teacher, when we do the training, go, oh, we've been doing this for years, and it's right, that's great. But we want to do it in a little bit more coordinated effort so that the student is seeing the same thing and begins to recognize it that way. So that is the goal for this year, this coming up, next school year, should I say. And then I just very quickly want to go over what our ESL department is doing. So our ESL department is great. They really move, and as I said, the CalPro trainer we have here on staff is part of ESL. So they also participated in the teacher training, and CalPro again spearheaded that. They did a great job. Implementation of feedback for growth mindset, which was to drive PLCs. So they took the PLC focus and they made it mastery learning, which gave them opportunities to go into that growth mindset, to show the student really what you need to do, how you'll know that you do it well, and then talk to the student and assess it later on. So again, the clear benchmarks and expectation, and then so students can see their progress. Another thing that they came up with, and this is new, we haven't quite implemented this. This is a new EL Civic. So you all might be seeing this at your school in the ESL. And it's a growth mindset component that they've got, CASAS has approved it. So they're working on that. And this one is all about growth mindset. And they're working on other ones that are coming up next, which is going to be self-efficacy, self-management, and then social awareness. So keep on the lookout for that. I believe this one's going to be ready to go for next year. So they've really moved much more forward than we have in the academic. And part of that is because they have a classroom environment that we don't quite have. We have labs, so a little bit hard to capture the students. So that is what we're doing. And Steve, I'll let you take it away and see. Do you want to talk to what you're doing?
Yeah, why don't we just move on through we're running
Okay, great.
short on time. So I'm going to move. We're going to talk about basically some tools that you can use in the SEL informed classroom. And these come straight out of our experience as an adult school program, trying to understand how to create that environment for our students. So if you can move to the next slide, Joe. Mm-hmm. So creating a SEL informed classroom, this is a great grid. It talks about how educators create these competencies: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness. We've talked about that. And then these are the small outgroupings that come out of this: affirming learning environments, learn, design, and instruction. It's a great little grid that you'll have access to. You can put it up. These are key, but I want to get to the nitty-gritty. So if we can move on to the next slide. So National University. So this is the assessment on the left here, self-assessing educator social. You've got that. You've taken that. If you haven't, it's lengthy, but it helps you take a look at your own training and teaching in the classroom and how you've set up your classroom. But the one I want to give you, and I'm not going to open it up, the link is here, but National University has put out a playbook series, and it's free. All you have to do is sign up for it. And what it does is it gives you step-by-step. What is SEL? Building healthy relationships, self-diversity and inclusion, trauma-sensitive educational environments. And each one of these is a little book, and it leads you to actual videos and skill sets that you can use to help build a social, emotionally learning environment for your classroom setting. So there's two tools right there, free, usable. The links are there. If we can go on to the next slide. So developing the executive function is the key part of a socially, emotionally informed learning environment. If you are not helping your students build these skills, then they will, it'll be a warm, friendly environment. That teacher loved me, but did you learn the skills you needed to move on in life? Because if you don't do that, then you may have a wonderful relationship with your students, but you didn't give them the skills to move on. And that was a hard discussion to have with my own teachers. Some of my teachers were they loved the fact that they had these great relationships with our students. And I said, but let's look at your CASA scores. Are you actually helping them build the skills? That comes back to the science of developing the executive function. So we're going to talk about some of the keys that need to be in place. This is all grounded in behavioral science, neuropsychology, social science. This research has been going on for a while. But now we understand why those basic functions, as Maslow understood, have to be in place before that executive function can develop. So we have to help them reduce those external sources of stress, creative, responsive, and supportive relationships, and building core self-regulation skills. So if we can go on to the next slide, we're going to talk about that.
And Sachiko put in the CalPro survey.
Perfect. So one of the things we realized right away was that what our students needed was they needed goals, and they needed support in building those goals. To have a set of goals, to even understand how to set a set of goals for yourself, and then what we call plan, do, repeat, do again. When you do that, what you're doing each time is you're building that connection to the executive function. This is something that it was available through CalPro. We use a different set of goal planning skills. Doesn't matter. The thing is that as a teacher, if you're not helping your students develop goals for themselves, because your job is to be their prosthetic executive function, literally to be their prosthetic executive function, to help them build the skills to do this. So this is, for instance, a SMART goal for the students, helping them set the steps. What's the timeline? How many of our students have those skill sets? They understand what steps they need to implement and what timeline. Go on to the next slide if you could. If they don't, what are the barriers that stop them from being able to execute the steps, to meet the timeline? And then building the skills, and this is key, building the skills to create those workarounds around the barriers. If it's childcare issues, if it's transportation, if it's housing insecurity, food insecurity, how can I help my student build the steps to get those in place so that they can get back to school and get back to learning? Because if those things aren't in place, they're not going to show up. And what we generally say is, well, they must not have valued the class. They couldn't make it today. All these things. We know from what COVID brought us is we can create what's called high flex classroom settings. So we can create a class where students can either be online or in the classroom. So if they have transportation issues, childcare issues, you name it. Now we're going to go into some other tools that are available that will help your students even further. So go ahead and go through the next slide. I'm not going to worry about these. These are great tools. Time management, excellent. Keep going. I wanted to get here. 2 key tools. The first one, Joe, if you could open up the digital promise. This.
Oh, I'm sorry, I went to the wrong one. Sorry.
That's all right.
Let me go ahead. I'll go back. All right, sorry.
Yep, go to the digital promise. If you could open up that one.
Can we see it?
No, not opening.
I have it on. I'm going to go ahead and put it back up there. Sorry, gang.
Yeah, and what I'll say about this is this was built by research throughout the United States. And I'm going to show you something fantastic. So if you could go up to where it says models, Joe, see the very top, there's an arrow, it says models.
Okay,
So keep going up. Yep, and if you could click on that. Now, before you do anything, take a look at this. This is all the way through adult learner. Click on adult learner. And this is going to open up. Now, if you'll scroll up, there we go, good. And if you will go to scroll up more, or scroll down, I should say. Yeah, there we go. If you'll go to self-regulation and click on that.
Sorry.
That's all right.
I don't know what's going on with my mouth. Okay, where are we?
Self-regulation, if you go up, there you go, click on that.
There we go.
And then if you'll scroll, there we go. It opens up this wheel. And if you keep scrolling down, it's going to give you tools among tools among tools. And it keeps scrolling down until you get to the one called mindfulness. There it is, if you open that up. Mindfulness activities for the adult ed classroom. If you want to talk about ways to reduce stress in the adult ed classroom with students who may be struggling with trauma, mindfulness. There are videos, there are tools. A 10-minute mindfulness practice with your students on just breathing has been shown to lower stress rates, cortisones in the brain. I mean, it's off the charts. This tool is available to you, and it's vast. It's vast. All right, if we can go back to the slideshow because we're running short on time.
Okay, and
I'm sorry, I'm rushing everybody through, but these tools are available to you through the PowerPoint. We're not going to watch the video, but this 211 LA, most of the counties around California have created what's called a 211 program. You can go online, you can call it. It will give you immediate access to resources, food, shelter, battered spouse homes, places they can go that are safe. This is, as a teacher, a lot of times we can't just go to a counselor. I've got a student that comes to class, they're home insecure. I can't get a hold of a counselor. It's late in the evening, I'm working. I can go onto this website and get connected immediately to services that are available. If I can begin to help my students meet those needs, those essential needs, then I'm beginning to help them put the supports in place to be successful in the classroom setting. All right, if we could go to the next slide.
sure.
So we have come to the end of our show. Sorry I moved us through so quickly there at the end, but I just wanted to make sure you saw these tools that are available to help you create the SEL classroom that's trauma-informed and help build those students' executive functioning skills. I've dubbed you now all prosthetic executive functions. Please do take the survey and give us input so that we know, for the future, for the field, as we help CalPro build these types of programs. They understand what was helpful, what wasn't helpful. And if we see you out at CCAE or something like that, please come up to Joe and I and say, hey, thanks, or hey, you could have done this differently, or whatever it takes.
Absolutely. So thank you for your time, and I apologize. We should have spoke a little quicker, maybe. We were right at 1:59. We very much appreciate your being here today, and it was a lot of information, and as you can see, it just kind of scratches the surface, but don't be overwhelmed by everything, because there is a lot to know, but at the same time, you just take it bite by bite. Pick
We're
one
planting
thing.
asparagus, Joe. We're planting asparagus.
Yeah, exactly.
As
And have
Adrian-
patience.
As Adrian taught it, Adrian said it takes 3 years. So you were spot on, Adrian. Good call.
Good job, Adrian. Did you Google that, or do you know that? Or were you at the same, when I saw that, it was a lady who, I think it was CCAE years ago, and she was talking about implementing an IET program. And she said, it took 3 years, but it was finally successful.
All right.
Everybody.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Please do share your feedback on the link in the chat. And also the handout was posted, and you can access all the links shared today. Thank you so much again, Joe and Stephen, for wonderful facilitation. And we hope to see you at another CalPro training soon. Thank you.
Thanks.